Welcome back to the Retro Sports Gamer channel, and I'm here to talk about a few things. But first thing is first, I want to talk about some of the events coming up here in Chicago, Berwyn, Illinois, Michael Anthony's Pizzeria. We did have one event back in May 9th on a Tuesday. It went pretty well. We had 30 plus people come out, and we're looking to do a few of those again leading up to football season and the tournament we're throwing. So I'm going to give you those dates right now. We got 8/22, a Tuesday. We're going to do some more Tecmo Super Bowl and some live streaming. We'll also have some other games there as well. And then 9/19 again, we're going to do some more Tecmo Super Bowl and have some kind of underlying theme there as well. And then we are throwing a tournament, me and Mort, on 10/7, October 7th, a Saturday. So look forward to that. It's going to be $20 entry fee. All prize money is going to the winners. So I will go into more detail about the tournament on another video. But on this video, I want to mainly talk about the tier list that was created by me and Mort, and then also my friend Ben helped me put it together. And we had some sources from TecmoGeek.com. So we got them in on the tier list. So what I'm going to do right now is share the tier list and give you a little bit of insight to what we were thinking about when we created this tier list. All right, so just hitting the screen share here. Tecmo tier list. And it should reverse here in a second. Okay, here we go. So the Tecmo tier list. So we created this, me and Mort. We were looking at getting a Tecmo scene going here in Chicago. There really hasn't been much that I know of. I know like maybe 6-7 years back, one of the guys from the Tecmo community, Eric Odell, threw a tournament in Lincoln Park in Chicago. I did play in that tournament, but he ended up moving back to his hometown. And there hasn't really been much of a scene here since. So, you know, I let Mort know that I had a connection at a bar, Michael Anthony's Pizza. They sponsored our softball team for about 8 years now. So they obviously are glad to have us in there for this kind of thing. So we did it May 9th. It went very well. Brought in a lot of customers there on a Tuesday. So here we are. We have the tier list. Now this is why we created the tier list, because there isn't much of a scene here in Chicago. And I know there are some good players from Chicago. We got the self-proclaimed best in the world, Flo. We got Mort here now in Chicago, Retro Sports Gamer. I play in Chicago. And we got some other guys. And I know there was a few good participants at the Tundra Bowl from Chicago. I don't remember their names, but I saw them playing. They were good as well. So what the people were inviting to the tournament, they remember, I mean, not the tournament, but out to Michael Anthony's to play some Tecmo Super Bowl. They remember playing the game, but they don't necessarily know who the best players are on each team and which teams match up well against each other. So the teams are unfair. Now, the first thing that this tier list aims to do is educate newer players on the best players on each team. So you see here on the tier list, it arguably gives the best offensive player and their best attribute, and also the best defensive player and their best attribute. So let's look at the Detroit Lions, for example. We got Barry Sanders, 69 max speed. We know he's the second fastest running back in the game. And then William White, a 56 max speed for defense. So it just so happens the best two players on that team, their best attribute is max speed. But if you look at a team like Miami Dolphins, Dan Marino, his passing speed is highlighted at 81, even though he has other good attributes. We highlight the 81 passing speed so people know Dan Marino's got a cannon and the ball will throw faster across the field. And let's see, who's a good example? Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Vinny Testaverde, 56 pass controls, actually his best attribute, but we know his 31 maximum speed, which isn't impressive, is for a quarterback and actually ties for second best. So we highlight that statistic. Wayne Haddock's 75 INT, that's second in the game. He's also a 75 max speed, but we highlighted that INT because it is better than other guys that are at a 75 max speed on defense, like Deion Sanders and Darrell Green. So that's what this aims to do. Give newer players the knowledge to know at least the best guy in offense and defense. And because on defense, you can't switch players in Tecmo Super Bowl, sometimes your best strategy is just use the best defense player every time. Now, skilled players are going to be able to take advantage of that based off of their offensive play calling. But generally speaking, if you're using Wayne Haddocks on Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or you're using Darrell Green every time on the Redskins, or Joey Browner on the Vikings, you're going to be in much better shape than you if you just pick random defensive players and see who's the best. So that's what we tried to do there. Now, the other thing is there's been tournaments that have went on, whether it be Tecmo Madison, Tundra Bowl, all these tournaments across the country where there are players that are there that maybe remember the game or they're just getting into it. And the matchup calling system works for most players across the board, but there's some newer players who don't necessarily pick good matchups, and they put themselves at a disadvantage before they even had a chance. So this tier list equalizes that from occurring. Now, the thing we do allow to do on the tier list is if you say you pick tier 2, so player 1 wins the coin toss, he's automatically player 1, just to remove any confusion, and say he picks tier 2. Now the guy who loses the coin toss is automatically player 2, and he gets his first choice of team. So since tier 2 was called, that eliminates tier 1. You can't use any of those teams, but you could use any of the lower tier teams if you want to. Now, obviously, anyone who's played the game before knows that the tier 2 teams are mostly better than the rest of the teams in tier 3, 4, or 5. So you're most likely going to pick a team in tier 2, but you can pick up a team in tier 3. Like, for instance, where I think this would be an advantage, say tier 2 picks Philadelphia. So the second player picks Philadelphia out of tier 2. The player 1, he might pick the Rams. The reason you pick the Rams, Eagles got a poor secondary. It's slow. It's not that good, and the Rams got great receivers, good quarterback. You could take advantage of that matchup. So there are little things that you could do, and that's why it gives you complete matchup flexibility when the tier is called. But generally speaking, you're going to get 2 teams from the same tier playing against each other, and that's going to allow for mostly equal matchups the whole time. The other thing it allows for is players who maybe don't get a chance to play that much and they're only good with a few teams. If, say, they pick tier 2 and there's a guy that's always good with Dolphins because he likes Dan Marino's passing speed, he doesn't care if he has to go up against the Chiefs, Bears, Raiders, Eagles, or Cincinnati. So he just picks tier 2 every time he wins a coin toss, and he figures his opponent will pick any of the other teams, and if he's good with the Dolphins, he can pick them every time and have a chance of winning. And I think that's better for new players too, because then they could just focus on a few teams that they really like, be it the Dolphins, Detroit. I mean, it could be anybody, but they could focus in on a few teams, and the matchups wouldn't be calculated in the tournament. And obviously, you could still do. You can't have the same matchup outcome, but I don't think it's a big deal as long as the tier matchup is or the tier system is used. You're gonna end up with pretty good matchups every time. So this is a guide for newer players, and then let me just talk a little bit about how we came to what is on this tier list specifically. Um, I talked to Mort about creating a tier list for newer players. So we only went back and forth a couple times. I think my original tier list had 6 tiers, and Mort pretty much said, like, we don't need to separate the middle tier teams. They're too close to each other. So, you know, I said that would be a good idea. And then he talked about banning the 49ers because we know that Joe Montana Jerry Rice connection is just so lethal mathematically because of how good the pass control of Joe Montana is and the receptions for Jerry Rice. So that's why we have ban optional for the 49ers when tier 1 is called. And then the other thing that Mort had in his 5th tier was only the Seahawks, New England, and Indianapolis. And even though I didn't disagree with that those are usually the matchups you see, I thought that at a tournament you don't want to limit players to only using those 3 teams if tier 6 is called, because a lot of players don't like those matchups. No one's going to a tournament really wanting to play Patriots and Colts. It's usually a matchup picked by a player that figures he's inferior to his opponent, so he picks a bottom of the barrel matchup and hopes to get lucky with some fumbles or JJs and just get a lucky win that way. So I suggested we add the Packers and the Browns to tier 5, and then we still have 5 options in tier 5. And I think there's a good case to match up, you know, the Packers against – the Packers are probably the best team in that tier, but definitely the Browns versus the Patriots. Even Patriots have the best secondary out of the tier 5 because of Ronnie Lippett, so he can kind of combat the QB Browns Webster Slaughter connection. And, yeah, the Seahawks, they have the fastest player on defense in that tier with Jacob Green, 63 max speed. And a lot of people like using the Seahawks. Dave Craig's got good pass control. So the only team you really never probably want to use is the Colts. They are the worst team in the game. Most people will say that. And, you know, there are better statistics for the Colts, especially receiving with Bentley, Bill Brooks, and their other receiver. They're all in the 60s, but I didn't want to highlight those specifically because the team's so bad, the quarterbacks are so poor. Kind of want to steer newer players away from using the Colts, but it still gives an accurate representation of 2 of the best attributes that the Colts have, be it that 44 max speed of Bentley and 44 INT of Mike Pryor on defense. Still gives you a good indication of who to use when you use the Colts. So, yeah, we just went back and forth a few times, and then this is what we came up with. I didn't really tell more what I was doing with the tier list, and then I came up with this idea. My friend Ben helped me create this tier list, and yeah, that's what you're seeing right now is the tier list here. So, yeah, there's some that you could argue for sure. I don't think any tier list is going to be perfect. You know, there's a few things just looking like you could say the Cowboys might be in tier 4, but the Cowboys have a pretty balanced defense, and they got fast running back. Troy Aikman's got a little bit of a pass speed to him, so I like using the Cowboys personally, so I would match them up against some of the tier 3 teams. What else do you have? You know, the Saints and Packers are usually a matchup that you would see called in the Tecmo Madison style matchup calling system. A lot of the tournaments adopt that same thing. So you see that matchup a lot. So you could go either way there. But yeah, and generally speaking, I think this tier list creates good matchups. And in tournaments or play, it just removes some of the confusion, like who's player 1, player 2 if you win the coin toss. I know in the heat of the moment at Tecmo Madison, I've screwed that up a few times, even though I know what it is. It's just like you just get confused. So just simplify that, and there you go. You have the tier list. So let's see. Some of the other things that we tried to do with this is just, like I said, the greater matchup flexibility. So if tier 3 is called by the coin toss winner, then automatically you have 18 teams you could choose from in that matchup. So you're usually probably going to use the 8 teams in tier 3, but you can actually go to the lower tiers as well. So you can use your favorite teams. If you think you're good with the Falcons because of Deion Sanders, Andre Rison, you just want to throw up some JJs, you want to go Falcons against the Lions, then go right ahead. Just do it. You know, it's up to you and what you're comfortable with. It doesn't pigeonhole you in a matchup. So I think it will just create some interesting matchups. And that's really another thing with the YouTube channel and the streaming. I want to see some matchups that we don't see too often in Tecmo Super Bowl. We probably will see still a lot of the same ones, but you might see some interesting ones. And then also you'll see which players like to use which teams. Because when you get a matchup calling system between 2 teams, you just have to use one of those teams. There's really no choice. But with the flexibility of the matchups, you could see that, you know, certain players are like, oh, they're always picking the Cardinals in tier 4. They must really like the Cardinals. Or they're always picking the Dolphins in tier 2 or the Eagles because of QB Eagles. So then you see which guys, like, they're always going to choose this team. So you can use that as your strategy. Like, man, I know if I pick tier 2, Flo's going to use the Eagles. He thinks QB Eagles are the best, and then he's going to use them. And then I feel like, well, I could bait him into the Eagles, and I could use another team. So it's something like that. Or, you know, tier 5 will be like, oh, Mort loves the Browns. Even though the Packers are probably better, he loves the Packers too. I feel like I might have get an advantage on him there. So there's different ways you could do with it, strategize to, even though there's, you know, more teams to choose from, after a while you can notice patterns of teams that players like to choose. So I think that's a pretty cool way of thinking of it. And if you're preparing for the tournament, newer players don't have to know how to use every single team. And since Tecmo Super Bowl is so, I would say, it's unbalanced, but there's the attributes and the stats go so, they're so deep into the game. That's why we all love the game. Every little statistic on each player could matter in the thick of the game. So, you know, if you are playing in the advanced tournaments, but whether it be the Tundra Bowl 5 or the next Tecmo Madison tournament, you're going to need to know that stuff anyway. So that's why that matchup calling system that was developed at one time is a very fair way of doing things. You can't really argue with it, but that's because at that level, you're going to have to know how to use every team anyways, because if you don't, you're not going to find yourself making a top cut in that tournament. But in a smaller tournament like this, you're trying to, because we're only going to have 20 max at our tournament. A smaller tournament, yeah, so a smaller tournament, you're not going to need to have knowledge of every single team. Just use a few teams, practice with a few teams. Even if you can't, if you don't have the game at home, you could come to a few of the Tuesday events, come practice with some of the better players that show up there, give you some tips, and you can find, you know, some success, and maybe you could be a Tecmo Super Bowl player that plays in future tournaments, because there's a lot across the country, and, you know, they're offering prizes. My big thing with video games, at some point I realized going into adulthood that I'm playing these games just for pure enjoyment, and that there's nothing wrong with that at all. I usually still play games for pure enjoyment when I play them, but it's also cool if you could get really good at a game and you know, win some money at it too. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Get good at a game. You know, there's people winning golf tournaments, all these sporting tournaments, these Street Fighter video games tournaments now. People are winning big cash. There's no reason you shouldn't be able, if there's a market for Tecmo Super Bowl and it's a chess match like NES game, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to make a little bit of money on the prizes. So just go for it. So if you get, that's the thing. This is a game where there's now tournaments pretty much a couple a month. So if you get good at this game and you can travel, you can enter quite a few tournaments across the board and try to win some cash. And also meet some cool people in the Tecmo community, have some beers, have a good time. So I think it is worth it for that. And I know I probably already said this, but the minimum you'd have to prepare for in a tournament is 10 teams. And the reason I say 10 teams is because if you know how to at least use 2 teams in every tier well, then there's no way you won't be able to use one of those teams with our tier system. So for instance, player 1 wins the coin toss, and player 1 has only been practicing with the Steelers and the Falcons. It's all he's comfortable with in tier 4. So player 2 now gets his choice tier 4. He picks the Falcons. And that's one of the teams that tier 1 likes to use. But since he practiced with the Steelers as well, he can use the Steelers against the Falcons. And since he practiced with 2 teams in that tier, he'll be able to feel comfortable playing against the Falcons, even though he likes to use that team too. And then, that's the way you could do it. Even though there's more in-depth strategy how teams match up, the more comfortable you are with the team, the better shot you're going to have, even if there is a better matchup. I know for a long time playing in a few of the tournaments, the Jets-Saints matchup, I never played it. People were calling it, in the tournament, and I would struggle with it. So now in that matchup specifically, I've gotten better with the Jets, and I'm like, okay, I at least feel comfortable with the Jets. So if that matchup's ever called at a tournament or just in casual play, I could pick the Jets and feel good about it. So, yeah, that's just an explanation. Just prepare with 10 teams instead of preparing for all the teams. And I think that's good for a smaller tournament as well. And the last thing that we added here, and this was mainly for the more advanced players, is the kicking range. If you see that KR on each team, the kicking range, that is basically the range the kicker will be able to kick in average. So it could go down, it could go up slightly, but generally speaking, that's the kicking range the kicker will be able to kick. So let's take a look at a team like the Chargers. They have a good kicker. I believe it's John Carney, 72 yards. So that means if you're on your own 45-yard line, that is the max range you will be able to kick. So it's basically 72 yards minus 7 for how far back the kicker is, and then minus 10 for the end zone. And that's 17 yards. So you do 17 minus 72. So again, we're looking at the Chargers, and there you go. You could kick a 55-yarder. So if you're on your own 45, there you go. So it's kind of like a cheat guide for, it's really for any player, beginner to advanced, but it doesn't require you to commit it to memory, because that's one of the things that when you're playing, you kind of know which kickers are good, but do you remember their exact range? I know I don't. I've talked to some of the other better players in Tecmo Super Bowl, and they don't remember the exact range that each kicker has. So I think this is a good sheet. It's a one-sheeter. You can keep it folded up in your pocket and then know in certain circumstances, how far can my kicker kick? Because that could be make or break. I mean, this is points at the end of the game. In a close matchup between a evenly matched opponent, a field goal can be the difference in the game. And if you're sitting there, with, let's say, the Kansas City Chiefs, you're sitting there on your own 47, and you're like, I'm way out of field goal range. No, you're not. Nick Lowry has got a boot, 73-yarder he can kick. So that means from his own, now I can't do the math, the 73 minus 17. Yeah, so he could kick from the 46. So yeah, 46 yard or 44. No, 46. Yeah. So 46 yard line. No, but it's own 44 yards. Sorry about that. I should have rehearsed that beforehand. But so yeah, you just need to know where your kicker's at. So the beginner players as well as the advanced players can use this as a tool for just having a quick sheet of the kicking range. So that is pretty much the tier list. We're going to be using this in the tournament on 10/7. That's October 7th. In the first half of the football season, Tecmo Super Bowl tournament. We'll see how it goes. It's going to be at Michael Anthony's Pizzeria in Berwyn, Illinois. Berwyn's right in the middle of the Chicagoland area, suburbs. It's technically a suburb, but if you drive straight south or north from Berwyn, you will actually hit parts of Chicago. So it might as well be a very close extension of Chicago. So if you're in the area or if you're in the Midwest, we're looking to get maybe 5 to 10 newer players and then 10 to 15 Tecmo veterans in this tournament. And then I'll talk about it later how we're going to kind of even the playing field with the system. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the tier list. One last thing, there's two things on the side. There's a key on the left to give newer players a indicator of what each thing means. So KR's kicking range, MS max speed, REC's receptions, PC's pass control, PS passing speed, INT interceptions. It's actually pass interceptions on the actual game, but that was just too long to fit on the key. Hitting power is HP. So if you see that on the Jets Dennis Bird HP, you see that 69, you look at the key, hitting power, you know what that is. So that is that. And I will stop sharing the screen. So yeah, if you have any questions about the tier list, let me know. I will post a link in the description below of the tournament coming up in Chicago. Also the meetup group and Mort's Tecmo101.wordpress.com blog. He updates it from time to time with some new Tecmo information. He's all about helping out the player, which I like. He's looking to grow the scene as well. So there we have it. Tecmo tier list. This is what we're going to be using at our tournament. Let me know how you like the tier list. And check out the links below. Thanks for watching.